The night of my parents' 35th anniversary, I sat at a table filled with relatives who barely noticed my presence. The moment that should have been about celebrating decades of marriage turned into a stage for humiliation. The restaurant overlooking Seattle's glittering lake stretched before us sunset, painting the water gold through wide glass windows. I was Olivia Parker, 33 years old, the invisible daughter. Around me, laughter bubbled and champagne glasses clinked while I twisted a water glass between my fingers. No one had asked about the small business award I'd just received for my coffee shop. No one noticed the carefully wrapped silver picture frame I'd brought as a gift, ordered specially with their names engraved along the edge. I was a shadow at the corner of the elegant table, watching my family perform their perfect routine without me. My sister Victoria sat at the center, her husband beside her, their 12-year-old son Lucas nearby. Every eye in the room focused on them as my father spoke proudly of Victoria's achievements. Her fashion boutique has already secured contracts with 3 major brands, he announced, chest puffed with pride. My mother followed with a glowing smile, adding every detail to ensure everyone knew how perfect her eldest daughter was. In the middle of everyone raising glasses for a toast, Lucas suddenly stood. He held a cold glass of soda and slowly walked toward me. At first, I thought he was only teasing, but the way his eyes locked on mine told me something was wrong. With the whole table watching, Lucas stopped, lifted his chin, and shouted, "Mom said you don't belong here." Then, without hesitation, he poured the soda straight into my lap. The icy liquid spread quickly through my dress, sticky and sweet against my skin. I froze while the entire table erupted in laughter, as if they had witnessed a brilliant comedy act. I looked around hoping someone would speak up. My father only shook his head and chuckled. "Kids will be kids. He's just being honest." My mother patted Victoria on the shoulder, laughing lightly. "He only said what was on his mind. Don't take it to heart." Victoria smiled triumphantly, offering no apology. As the laughter carried on, I simply picked up a thin napkin and slowly dabbed at the spreading stain. I forced a faint smile. No reaction, no argument. My whole body trembled not from the cold, but from the undeniable truth that struck me at that moment. They had never considered me a part of this family. As I drove back to Portland that night, memories washed over me in layers. This evening was not a beginning. It was the inevitable result of years of being placed in the role of an outsider within my own family. The yellowed streetlights stretched into blurred streaks as I remembered a childhood of inequity. From a young age, my parents created 2 different worlds under the same roof. The first world belonged to Victoria, the perfect daughter, their brilliant pride. The second, small and faint, belonged to me. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting alone at my piano recital, scanning the empty seats where my family should have been. They had gone instead to Victoria's job interview, deemed more important than my performance. On Victoria's birthday, the whole family threw outdoor parties with balloons, 3-tier cakes, neighbors and friends filling the yard. My parents stood together, eyes shining with happiness, proudly telling everyone their eldest daughter would definitely attend a top university. A year later for my birthday, a small gift box contained only a store-bought card from the local grocery. No party, no special wishes. I remembered smiling and saying thank you, then sitting on my bed for hours, clutching the card, while tears streamed down my face. Victoria received the best of everything. When she graduated high school, my parents gave her a brand new Toyota Corolla. For me, 4 years after my graduation, there was only a message. "Congratulations, remember to work hard so you can buy what you need yourself." I tried to comfort myself that perhaps I was stronger, didn't need as much help. But as I grew older, I understood this favoritism wasn't because I lacked effort. It was because in my parents' eyes, I had never been a child worthy of pride. The most painful moment came from my father, the one I once believed would be fair. He pressured me into co-signing a loan so Victoria could open her fashion store. At that time, I had just started my coffee and bakery shop, struggling to raise enough capital. But my father said bluntly, "You're the only one in the family with a good enough credit score. This is family business. Don't let us down." I remember sitting in my room that night for hours, pen trembling in my hand, knowing that if I signed, I would be taking on a risk that was never mine to bear. but I signed anyway because I still longed to be recognized as a beloved daughter, as a true member of the family. I thought that if I helped Victoria, maybe my parents would finally look at me differently. That hope had been futile. For 2 years, Victoria had been late on payments multiple times, affecting my credit score. She never mentioned my help to anyone, instead, boasting about building her business from scratch with pure determination. Remembering every indifferent glance, every holiday where I was forgotten, every mocking comment that went uncorrected, I realized the soda incident wasn't a fresh wound, but the final verdict on my place in this family. The highway stretched dark before me, but for the first time after being hurt by my family, I did not cry. There was no tightness in my chest, no self-blame. What I felt was a cold emptiness, as if I had stepped through a door I had never truly been allowed to open. I looked into the rearview mirror at Seattle fading behind me and thought to myself, they never saw me as one of them. Never. Arriving at my small apartment above the coffee shop in Portland, the scent of fresh pastries still lingered from that morning's batch. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sank into my worn sofa and listened to my heart pounding in the darkness. The place was cramped but quiet, filled with books and the small piano I had saved for years to buy. For the first time, I felt a faint glimmer of clarity in the stillness. I didn't have to keep carrying their burdens anymore. I didn't need to live to prove myself to people who had never acknowledged me. Opening my laptop, the dim blue screen illuminated my face. I logged into my bank account and scrolled through the numbers until I stopped at the loan information. The line, "Co-signer Olivia Parker," tightened something in my chest. It was the invisible chain that had tied me to Victoria and my parents for the past 2 years. I remembered the day I signed the papers, my father placing his hand on my shoulder and saying, "You're doing this for the family. One day you'll understand." Today I understood. I understood that it had all been a way for them to exploit my devotion to feed Victoria's privilege. My fingers trembled as I hovered over the withdraw authorization button. I hesitated for a few seconds, a last trace of guilt still lingering. Then I took a deep breath and clicked. The screen blinked and a message appeared. "Your request has been processed." In that moment, it felt as if someone had loosened a rope around my chest. I sank back into the chair and let out a quiet laugh. Not a laugh of joy, but of utter relief. I had cut it off. I no longer carried their burden. I didn't sleep right away that night. I sat by the small window, watching the streetlights spill into the silent darkness of my room. I thought about the years that had passed, the meager greeting cards of parties where I was forgotten, the times I was mocked in front of others, and all the moments I had turned a blind eye in the faint hope my family would change. If it hadn't been for Lucas and his soda, perhaps I would have kept enduring, kept clinging to the collar of so-called family ties. But now it was different. That glass of soda and the collective laughter that followed was the bell that rang the end. The next morning, I woke to the blare of a tow truck's horn outside. Fresh sunlight filtered through my curtains, and early morning mist still lingered along the sidewalk. I stepped onto the small balcony of my apartment, a cup of hot coffee warming my hands. Just across the street, in front of a polished brownstone where Victoria kept her second home for Portland business trips, a bright yellow tow truck was slowly backing up. Neighbors had gathered in small clusters, whispering and pointing. Hooked tightly to the back, Victoria's luxury SUV, barely a year old, was lifted inch by inch. The scene wasn't loud yet. The silence laced with murmurs made it feel like a public declaration. The lavish image Victoria once flaunted had been stripped bare. I stood there, making no effort to hide, calmly sipping my coffee. For the first time, I felt no nervousness about the consequences. The car was hauled away, leaving behind an empty driveway and the uneasy stares of neighbors. I knew the news would spread quickly. The same people who used to gossip about Victoria's designer clothes and European trips would now talk about the SUV towed away in broad daylight. At 8 o'clock, sharp, frantic pounding on my door announced itself so urgently that before I could set my coffee down, I already knew who it would be. I opened the door, and as expected, Victoria stood there, her face pale, her blonde hair a tangled mess as if she had rushed over. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled stack of loan documents, the pages wrinkled as though she had balled them up in anger. Victoria offered no greeting. She immediately screamed, "You are destroying the family all because of a child's prank!" Her voice echoed down the hallway, causing a few neighbors to peek from behind their doors. I remained standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other folded across my chest. I looked straight into her panicked eyes without saying a word. My silence felt like a thick wall, which only made Victoria more unhinged. She thrust the papers toward me, flipping through numbers and bank statements, as if the ink could rewrite reality. "Do you understand?" she cried. "The shop rent, Lucas's tuition, the credit cards, it all depends on you. How could you withdraw your name from the loan? Do you think you can live separately? This is family." I didn't move. I felt her fury and desperation, yet strangely, I felt no guilt. Instead, a calm settled over me, as if after years of being placed beneath others, my balance had finally shifted. Victoria kept speaking, her voice breaking. "Mom and Dad will never forgive you. They will see you as a traitor. Are you happy to watch us lose everything?" In that moment, I realized something I had never seen so clearly before. My strength had never come from making them happy, but from my right to choose. I had signed as a co-signer out of pressure, out of a desperate desire to be acknowledged. And now it was also my right to cut it off. My silence left Victoria choking on her words. She waited for me to justify myself, to tremble and apologize. But all she got was a calm, steady gaze. After a long pause, Victoria exhaled sharply, her arm falling limp, the papers nearly slipping from her grasp. I saw her fingers trembling from the dawning realization that I would no longer be the shield they could hide behind. Before turning away, she threw out one last line, "You'll regret this." I gave a slight nod, a careless acknowledgement, then closed the door. The click of the lock sounded like a full stop. I stood in the quiet apartment, listening to the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, and for the first time in years, I did not feel dragged down by their unreasonable demands. The feeling wasn't triumphant joy, but profound relief, as if an invisible chain had just slipped from my wrist. The morning after Victoria's SUV was towed away, the days that followed became a storm of relentless calls and messages. My phone rang every hour, and every time the screen lit up, it was my mother's or father's or Victoria's name. At first, their voices tried to sound gentle, as if a small concession from me could return everything to normal. "Olivia, don't make this worse. Victoria just made a mistake. You're her sister. You should let it go." My mother's tone was the same she had always used to excuse my sister's faults. But right after the pleading came the subtle threat, "If you don't undo this, your father and I will consider you no longer part of this family." Victoria was different. The messages she sent came in a relentless stream like bullets. At one moment she begged, "Olivia, I spoke without thinking. Please help me just this once. Lucas still needs to go to school. I can't manage alone." But only minutes later her tone would flip. "I don't believe you dare do this to your own family. Do you really think you can live in peace? Don't forget who gave you this name." I read each line as it appeared, never replying, only saving them in a separate folder, as evidence of an old habit, their way of forcing me into submission through guilt. I created a detailed log, organizing everything chronologically, noting the time and content of each call and message. Something told me this documentation would be important. The worst of all was Lucas. He was only 12, yet his behavior already carried the arrogance nurtured by years of indulgence. One afternoon, I opened my phone to see a new notification. It was a TikTok video. Lucas standing with a few friends pretending to pour soda over his clothes, howling with laughter, then staring straight into the camera and saying, "And Olivia doesn't belong here." The mocking laughter that filled the video made me feel both furious and sick to my stomach. I remembered the moment that freezing soda spilled into my lap at the anniversary dinner, and now the boy had turned it into a public joke. I saved the video, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. I tried to push it aside and continue with my work at the coffee and bakery shop, but it did not end there. One late evening, as I locked up and walked into the parking lot, I froze. My old car sat quietly under the streetlight, but its body had been slashed with deep scratches running from front to back, the paint peeled in jagged streaks. My hands shook with anger, but before I could react, my eyes fell on the shop's front window. A large crack split across the glass fragments scattered across the sidewalk. I stood still for a few seconds, stunned, a wave of fear and bitterness rising inside me. They had brought their spite into my work, into the place I had built with my sweat and tears. I took a deep breath and hurried to check the security cameras. The screen showed the undeniable scene in clear detail. Lucas and another boy, both wearing hoodies, were laughing like they were putting on a show. One of them used a key to scratch my car, while Lucas swung a club at the shop window, filming with his phone as he went. When the glass cracked, they laughed in delight, and Lucas even turned to the camera and made a mocking gesture. I sat frozen in front of the screen, but instead of crying or collapsing like I would have before, a different feeling rose up inside me. Enough. I could not stay silent one more time. I could not keep letting them think I would endure forever, that I would bear all the consequences to preserve so-called family ties. That same evening, while attending a small business networking event downtown, I met Morgan Chen, a lawyer specializing in family disputes and harassment cases. As I described my situation, her expression grew serious. "Olivia, what you're describing isn't just family drama. It's property damage, harassment, and potentially financial abuse. You need to document everything and consider legal action." The idea of taking legal action against my own family felt both terrifying and liberating. Morgan gave me her card and suggested we meet formally to discuss options. "Sometimes setting boundaries requires more than just words," she said, "especially when those boundaries have been crossed repeatedly." 2 days later, I was introduced to a group called Women's Circle, a support network for women facing various forms of family and relationship abuse. At my first meeting, I sat nervously in a circle of chairs, wondering if my experience even qualified as abuse. Then Rachel, the owner of a successful spa chain, shared her story of escaping a financially exploitative family. Jasmine, an interior designer, talked about standing up to her brother who had drained their parents' retirement fund. When it was my turn, I hesitantly shared the soda incident, the towed car, and the vandalism. To my surprise, no one thought I was overreacting. Instead, I received nods of understanding and validation. "Your experience is textbook financial exploitation," said Rachel. "They've been using you as their safety net without appreciation. That's not family, that's parasitic." Through this group, I was connected with David Parker, my father's younger brother, whom I hadn't seen in years. Uncle David had worked in the legal field before retiring and had always been somewhat of an outcast in the family because he questioned my parents' treatment of me. When David received the evidence, I had collected his voice over the phone was calm but sharp. "Send me everything you have. I will look and tell you what to do. But hear me, Olivia, if you let this pass, they will think you have no value. They will push further." His words were both a warning and a push I couldn't ignore. It was time not only to protect my property, but to protect my dignity and my safety. The next morning, David and Morgan came to the shop with stern faces carrying documents and laptops. We sat reviewing every frame of the security footage, every saved message, every record of financial support I had provided over the years. Morgan pointed to each detail, noting times, dates, and patterns of behavior. "This is solid evidence of harassment and property damage," she said. "We'll file a police report about the vandalism first. Then we need to address the financial entanglement. Your withdrawal from the loan was completely legal, but we should prepare for potential retaliation." A strange sense of reassurance washed over me, not because I wanted revenge, but because for the first time in years, I felt that a legal process was standing on my side. That afternoon, we went to the police station. The officer who took my report was a middle-aged woman named Investigator Barnes. She listened carefully as I recounted everything from the anniversary dinner to the TikTok video and the security footage. David sat beside me occasionally, adding details about the financial manipulation and preserved evidence. After reviewing the video, Investigator Barnes noted, "We already have a few complaints related to Lucas from his school record, but until now there hasn't been strong visual proof like this. This time, it could lead to criminal charges or juvenile intervention. We will open a case file and assign an investigator." For the first time, I heard the words, "open a case file," without feeling fear. Instead, there was a sense of tangible support. In the days that followed, the police called to inform me they would be contacting Lucas's school to verify prior reports. They also invited several witnesses, regular customers of mine, who had seen the vandalism to give statements. At the same time, Morgan helped me draft a letter to the bank confirming my withdrawal from all documents tied to Victoria's shop, closing off any legal loopholes they might use to shift responsibility. She also advised me about the possibility of a civil suit for the costs of repairing the window and the car, as well as emotional distress, since the actions were clearly intended to humiliate and harm my reputation. One late afternoon, as I was cleaning up the cafe, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. On the other end was a trembling female voice. "Excuse me, are you Olivia Parker?" I confirmed, and she introduced herself as Hannah, who had once worked as a sales clerk at Victoria's boutique. I vaguely remembered her face, a young woman who often stood behind the counter whenever I stopped by, though we had never spoken much. Hannah's words came quickly, as if she feared she might lose her courage if she slowed down. "I don't want to get dragged into this, but I can't take it anymore. I have messages where Victoria and your mother talked about setting you up." My body went cold, my heart racing. Hannah continued, her voice breaking. "They said you were unstable, that they had to make everyone believe you weren't capable of handling finances. I accidentally saw it in a workgroup chat, and I saved screenshots." I arranged to meet Hannah at a different cafe a few blocks away. She arrived looking anxious, clutching her phone tightly. On the screen, she showed me screenshots of messages. Victoria had written to my mother, "We need to prove Olivia has problems. If she loses credibility, the bank won't trust her word." My mother replied, "Yes, I'll subtly tell the relatives that she still hasn't gotten over the old trauma. Everyone will believe it." Reading those words sent a stabbing pain through me and a chill down my spine. So the pitying looks a few relatives had given me weren't by chance. They had all been part of a calculated plan to discredit me. I immediately forwarded the evidence to Morgan and David. Morgan's eyes narrowed as she examined the messages. "This isn't just cruelty within a family. This is collusion to smear your reputation legally. It could be considered defamation." Before I had even recovered from the meeting with Hannah, another call came. This time it was from a fabric supplier for Victoria's boutique. The man was direct. "I'm calling to ask if you really agreed to these invoices Victoria sent, because your name appears on the paperwork as a co-owner." Stunned, I asked him to send me copies. When the files arrived, my heart sank. There it was, my name, Olivia Parker, alongside a forged signature next to Victoria's. They had used my name to place orders exploiting my credit to secure favorable terms with suppliers. I forwarded the documents straight to Morgan, who immediately added them to our growing case file. "This is fraud and impersonation," she stated firmly. "They've broken the law beyond any doubt." The news spread faster than I expected. In the small business community where I operated, whispers began to circulate, from Victoria's boutique shutting down to murmurs that the Parker family was not as perfect as the image they had polished for years. One regular customer leaned in and whispered, "Everyone always thought your parents were the model couple with successful children, but I hear it's all unraveling now." I simply stayed quiet and gave a faint smile. I didn't need to add anything. Truth was already speaking loudly enough. The court date arrived sooner than I expected. In the weeks leading up to it, Morgan and the team prepared every file, numbered each piece of evidence, and backed up all the data. I was told again and again, "All you need to do is tell the truth, stay calm, and let the law do the rest." Still, as I approached the King County Courthouse in downtown Seattle, my heart pounded and my hands were cold. Before me, the gray stone building loomed with its tall steps leading up to heavy wooden doors. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, knowing this was not just a hearing, but a turning point that would shape the rest of my life. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. I sat on the plaintiff's side with Morgan, while Rachel Jasmine and several other members from the women's circle sat right behind me, like a solid wall of support. Across from us, Victoria and her husband sat stiffly, faces hard and tense. What cut deeply, though it came as no surprise, was the presence of my parents. They chose to sit beside Victoria just behind the defendant's row, their cold eyes passing over me as if I were a stranger. I had braced myself for that possibility, but seeing them truly aligned with the other side still made me tremble. The trial began with the presentation of evidence. First came the security camera footage of Lucas and his friend vandalizing my car and smashing the shop window. On the large screen in the courtroom, every detail was clear. The club striking the glass, the bursts of laughter, Lucas's face visible beneath the hood as he turned to make mocking gestures at the camera. The room fell completely silent when the clip ended, broken only by faint whispers and the judge's pen tapping lightly on the bench. Then came the forged invoices with my name and signature. My lawyer highlighted the inconsistencies in the handwriting, comparing them with samples of my genuine signature. Next were the messages Hannah had given us, the conversation between Victoria and my mother about setting Olivia up. Hannah was called to the stand, her voice trembling but firm. "I saw it with my own eyes, and I don't want to stay silent anymore." Then it was my turn. I stood, my hands clenched tightly, and told the story from the beginning. The anniversary dinner, the freezing soda in my lap, the laughter that echoed around the table, the years of financial support I had provided, the mocking messages, and the crushing feeling of being cast out of my own family. When I repeated Lucas's words, "Mom said you don't belong here," I glanced briefly at my mother. She lowered her head, offering no denial, but showed not the slightest sign of remorse. In that moment, I realized I no longer expected recognition from her. All I wanted was for justice to stand on the side of truth. The defense attorney tried to argue that this was merely a family dispute blown out of proportion, that Lucas's actions were nothing more than childish mischief, and that Victoria had only asked for help financially, rather than coercing me. They even claimed I had misinterpreted the situation when I believed I was being set up. But when the judge ordered the video of the vandalism to be replayed and the messages displayed again, the defense's words quickly fell apart. The lines, "We need to prove Olivia is unstable," lit up on the screen, undeniable to everyone present in the courtroom. After several hours, the judge, a stern-faced middle-aged woman, delivered her conclusion. She looked directly at Victoria and my parents, her voice sharp and precise. "This is not a private family matter that can be solved with a dinner or an apology. This is unlawful conduct, property damage, financial fraud, and impersonation. The court will rule on evidence, not excuses." As I heard the verdict, my whole body felt like it had finally released its tension. Victoria and her husband were ordered to compensate me $32,000 to cover material damages, car repairs, window replacement, and legal costs. Lucas was placed in a mandatory 200-hour community service program, along with juvenile counseling. Most strikingly, the judge emphasized, "This family must recognize that covering up and indulging such behavior only harms children, teaching them to disregard the law and others' boundaries." When the ruling was read aloud, several people present, including distant relatives and acquaintances, looked at my parents and Victoria with eyes full of disappointment. I did not cheer in victory. I simply sat there listening to each word of the verdict and felt a deep sense of relief. For years, I had been treated like a shadow, used as a financial tool, mocked even at my parents' anniversary dinner. And now the truth had been spoken. Justice had been laid out, and no one could deny it. When the trial ended, I gathered my papers and walked out. I did not look at Victoria nor at my parents. My footsteps echoed on the cold tile floor. But inside, I heard something else, the sound of release. Outside the courtroom, the Seattle wind blew strong, scattering yellow leaves through the air. Uncle David walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You did it, Olivia," he said. "From now on, you don't have to carry anyone else's burdens." I lifted my head, breathing in the sharp scent of sea air mingled in the breeze. In front of me, there was no longer the shadow of the Parker family, but a new path where I could walk on my own feet. After the trial, I thought things would settle. But like an animal cornered, Victoria and my family did not accept defeat easily. In the first few weeks, I still noticed traces of petty harassment. One morning when I opened the shop, the word "traitor" was sprayed in red across the side wall. Another time, my mailbox was stuffed with scraps of paper scrawled with anonymous notes. "The family will never forgive you." But this time I did not tremble. I photographed everything and sent it straight to the police. The difference was they no longer ignored it. Because after the verdict, the legal file was on record, and each new report I filed was handled swiftly. One familiar officer even told me, "Don't worry, we won't let this escalate any further." The difference was not only in the protection of the law, but within myself. I no longer saw those acts of harassment as a measure of my worth. Now they were nothing more than noise outside the glass, no longer able to pierce through. I poured my focus into the coffee and bakery shop, which had suddenly become livelier than ever. Customers came not only for pastries, but because my story had spread throughout the community. A local newspaper published an article titled, "The Woman Who Stood Up Against Toxic Favoritism." It told of how I built the shop on my own, how I dared to resist injustice within my family, and how I chose to protect myself. I read that article one quiet evening, feeling both moved and at peace. For the first time, my voice wasn't drowned out by the mocking laughter of relatives. It rang out as proof of resilience. The shop grew busier, sales doubling within just a few months. Fruit tarts, buttery croissants, and dark roast coffee were nearly gone before afternoon. I hired more staff, expanded the menu, and hosted small workshops for high school students on baking. Not long after, I received a letter from the Portland Small Business Association informing me that I had been honored as Small Business of the Year. I had to read the words several times before I could believe them. At the award ceremony, I stood on stage, bright lights shining down, facing an audience full of strangers yet filled with support. I spoke briefly about my journey, emphasizing that success does not come from being coddled, but from standing tall when others want to see you fall. The applause thundered through the room, and I felt my eyes grow wet. While I was busy moving forward, news about Victoria and my parents trickled back to me, mostly through distant relatives or old acquaintances. Victoria's boutique was officially bankrupt, the landlord putting up a for lease sign. Several suppliers filed lawsuits over fraudulent contracts. Her husband, the one she used to flaunt as a brilliant business partner, lost his job because the company wanted no connection to the scandal. My parents, who once stood proudly in church and in the community as a model couple, now found themselves shunned. Someone told me that during a church service, when my father stood up to speak, the room fell into awkward silence without a single clap. The honor they had clung to for so long was crumbling piece by piece. The isolation came from the very community they had once tried to control. Whispers turned into public conversations. The Parkers weren't perfect. They pushed down the younger daughter to pamper the elder. Now everything is out in the open. I heard these words secondhand, but I no longer felt bitterness. What I felt was justice, simple and natural, finding its way at last. One evening, as I locked up the shop, I paused at the window, the yellow streetlights spilling across the rain-slicked sidewalk. I thought about the path I had walked, from the freezing soda spilling across my dress at the anniversary dinner, to the bursts of mocking laughter, to the nights I trembled signing papers for the family. Now, all of that was behind me. I no longer had to strain to prove my worth to people who never wanted to see it. I had customers, employees, and a community that valued my story. And most importantly, I had myself a stronger, freer, and respected Olivia. I know there will still be malicious rumors, still cold stares from those who share the Parker name. But unlike before, I no longer feel fear or shame. What I feel now is calm. My life is not defined by their approval. It is defined by how I rose after everything and how I chose a new path for myself. And on that path, I walk with one clear belief. I don't need a toxic family to survive. I only need myself. During those first months after the trial, my circle of support expanded in unexpected ways. At a Portland business owners networking event, I met Morgan Chen, a sharp-minded attorney specializing in family law. She had read about my case in the newspaper and approached me with genuine interest. "What you did took tremendous courage," she said as we shared coffee at the corner table. "Most people never break free from toxic family dynamics. They just endure." Morgan's words struck a chord. She told me about her work helping people establish boundaries with manipulative family members. And soon, our professional connection grew into friendship. She introduced me to the Women's Circle, a support group for women who had overcome various forms of abuse and manipulation. The first time I attended a meeting, I sat nervously in a circle of chairs arranged in a community center room. The women around me came from diverse backgrounds, but all shared something in common. They had each found the strength to break free from toxic relationships. Rachel, a successful spa owner in her 40s, shared her story of financial abuse by her ex-husband. Jasmine, an interior designer, talked about standing up to her narcissistic mother after decades of emotional manipulation. Each story held pieces of my own experience, creating an unexpected sense of belonging. When it was my turn, I hesitated at first, then began sharing about the anniversary dinner, the soda incident, and the aftermath. The supportive nods and understanding glances told me I was finally among people who truly got it. "What strikes me about your story," said Rachel after I finished, "is that you didn't just escape. You built something beautiful for yourself in the process." That evening marked the beginning of a new kind of family for me, one built on mutual respect and genuine care. We met twice monthly sometimes for formal support sessions, other times for casual dinners or weekend hikes in the mountains outside Portland. With each gathering, I felt the hole left by my biological family, filling with something healthier, something real. Through the women's circle, I also connected with Dr. Elena Torres, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our first session was difficult, as I unpacked the years of subtle emotional abuse, the comparison to Victoria, and the constant message that I wasn't enough. "What you're describing is the golden child scapegoat dynamic," Dr. Torres explained. "It's remarkably common in dysfunctional families. One child becomes idealized while another bears all the family's projected negativity and blame." Week by week, I began to understand the deeper patterns that had shaped my family. How my father's own insecurities drove him to live vicariously through Victoria's accomplishments. How my mother, afraid of being alone, had chosen to enable the dysfunction rather than confront it. Understanding doesn't mean excusing, Dr. Torres reminded me during a particularly difficult session. You can recognize the forces that shape them while still holding them accountable for how they treated you. Those words became my mantra as I worked through the complex emotions surrounding my family. The anger was still there, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it fueled my determination to create a life defined by my own values, not their expectations. 6 months after the trial, the harassment had mostly stopped. Victoria had moved to Chicago with her husband, trying to rebuild their lives away from the scandal. My parents still lived in Seattle, though I heard they were considering selling their house as their social standing continued to crumble. Lucas, from what Uncle David told me, was struggling in the juvenile program, but showing small signs of improvement. The counselor had reported that beneath the arrogance was a confused boy who had simply modeled the behavior he saw in his mother. It would be a long road for him to unlearn those patterns, but there was hope. My own life was transforming in ways I never imagined. With business booming, I hired Andrea, a talented baker who brought new ideas to our menu. Having reliable help meant I could finally take weekends off, occasionally exploring Portland's vibrant art scene or hiking in the Columbia River Gorge with friends from the women's circle. One Sunday morning, as I was enjoying a rare lazy breakfast at home, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Olivia Parker?" a hesitant female voice asked when I answered. "Yes, it is." "This is Hannah," she said, "Victoria's former employee. We met briefly during your case." And Hannah had been a key witness providing evidence of Victoria and my mother's plan to discredit me. I hadn't heard from her since the trial. "I hope it's okay that I called," she continued. "I just wanted you to know that I started my own small clothing boutique in Portland. Your story inspired me to finally take the leap." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "That's wonderful, Hannah. I'd love to see it sometime." "Actually, that's part of why I'm calling," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "I'm wondering if you might consider a collaboration. My boutique and your bakery. Maybe a fashion-themed afternoon tea event or something similar." The idea was brilliant, exactly the kind of community-building initiative I'd been wanting to explore. We arranged to meet later that week to discuss details. As I hung up, I marveled at how life unfolds in unexpected ways. The very situation that had caused me so much pain was now opening doors to new opportunities and connections. That afternoon, I visited my favorite spot in Portland, a small park overlooking the Willamette River. As I sat on a bench watching kayakers paddle through the gentle current, I reflected on the past year. The journey had been painful, but it had led me to this moment of genuine peace. I had discovered that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about finding people who see your worth and celebrate your strength. My phone buzzed with a text from Morgan. "Dinner tonight with the Circle Rachel's, making her famous lasagna." I smiled and typed back, "Count me in, I'll bring dessert." The evening sun cast long shadows across the park as I stood up ready to head back to my apartment to bake something special for the women who had become my chosen family. With each step, I felt lighter, more certain. The shadow of the Parker family no longer followed me. Instead, I walked in my own light, creating a path entirely my own. The business continued to thrive beyond my expectations. By the following spring, Wheat and Wonder had become something of a Portland institution. Tour guides would point it out to visitors as the bakery with the incredible story, and I'd often look up from the counter to see curious faces peering through the front windows. What had once been a small, struggling shop was now a bustling hub of activity. I had expanded into the vacant space next door, adding a cozy reading nook with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable armchairs. Locals came not just for the pastries, but for the warm, welcoming atmosphere where they could feel at home. With Andrea handling most of the baking, I focused on developing community programs. We started a weekly workshop called Bake Your Story, where people could learn to make family recipes while sharing the memories attached to them. It became unexpectedly therapeutic for many participants, a way to reclaim positive family traditions while processing difficult ones. One Thursday afternoon, as I was preparing for the workshop, the bell above the door chimed. I looked up to see a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, standing awkwardly near the entrance. Something about her posture, the way she seemed to make herself smaller, struck a familiar chord. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting down the measuring cups I'd been arranging. She twisted the strap of her backpack nervously. "Are you Olivia Parker?" "Yes, I am." "I'm Emma," she said. "I read about you in the newspaper, and She hesitated, looking down. "I'm going through something similar with my family. They always compare me to my brother. Nothing I do is ever enough." My heart contracted with understanding. I gestured to the chair opposite mine. "Would you like to sit down? We can talk." Emma nodded gratefully. Over hot chocolate and fresh scones, she told me about her family situation. Her brother was the academic star headed to an Ivy League school while she struggled with undiagnosed learning disabilities that her parents refused to acknowledge. They called her lazy, unmotivated, a disappointment. "They don't see how hard I try," she said, wiping away tears. "They don't know I stay up until 2 in the morning just to finish assignments that my brother could complete in an hour." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I believe you," I said simply. Those 3 words seemed to hit her like a physical force. She looked up startled, as if no one had ever said that to her before. Perhaps no one had. By the end of our conversation, I had connected Emma with resources at her school for learning disability assessment and introduced her to the concept of setting boundaries even as a minor. I also invited her to join our Saturday youth baking program, where she could build skills and confidence away from her family's criticism. As Emma left, promising to return on Saturday, I felt a profound sense of purpose. My story wasn't just about my own healing anymore. It was becoming a beacon for others stuck in similar situations. The pain I'd endured now had meaning beyond myself. That evening, I shared the encounter with Dr. Torres during our weekly session. "You've moved into the next phase of recovery," she observed. "You're transforming your trauma into a way to help others. That's an incredibly powerful healing mechanism." It felt like looking at my younger self, I admitted. All those years I spent believing something was wrong with me, when the problem was always the toxic dynamic. "And now you can be the person you needed back then," Dr. Torres said with a gentle smile. The insight stayed with me for days afterward. I began thinking about formalizing my mentorship program for young people dealing with family dysfunction. Morgan helped me navigate the legal considerations, while Rachel offered to connect me with a grant writer to seek funding. In July, I launched Your Worth Project, an 8-week summer program for teens experiencing family-based emotional abuse or neglect. We combined skill-building workshops in baking and business with supportive group therapy sessions led by volunteer counselors. Emma was among our first 12 participants, her shy smile gradually growing more confident with each meeting. The project caught the attention of local media, and soon a reporter from the Oregonian was sitting in my office, recorder in hand. "What made you decide to create this program?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. When you've been told your entire life that you don't matter, that you're less valuable than someone else, you start to believe it. It becomes the lens through which you see everything. This program exists to shatter that lens and help these young people see their true worth. The article appeared the following Sunday, taking up most of the lifestyle section's front page. The headline read, "From Family Scapegoat to Community Beacon, How Olivia Parker Turned Personal Pain into Purpose." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails and calls flooded in from parents wanting to enroll their children, educators seeking resources, and potential donors asking how they could support the program. But most moving were the messages from people sharing their own stories of family dysfunction and expressing gratitude for the public conversation the article had started. It was after reading one such message late one evening, as I sat alone in my office above the bakery, that my phone rang. The screen displayed Mom. I stared at it, heart suddenly pounding. It had been nearly 10 months since the trial, with no contact beyond the harassment in those early weeks. Part of me wanted to ignore the call to maintain the peaceful life I'd built without them, but another part, perhaps the therapist's voice in my head, was curious about what had prompted this reach out after so long. After 4 rings, I answered. "Hello, Olivia." My mother's voice sounded older, more hesitant than I remembered. "I saw the article about your program." I waited, not offering any response to make this easier for her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, the words coming slowly as if each one cost her. "And I've been seeing someone. A therapist, I mean. Your father doesn't know." This surprised me. My mother had always dismissed therapy as for weak people who can't solve their own problems. "She's helped me understand some things," my mother went on, "about how we treated you, about the role we forced you into in our family." I remained silent, processing her words with cautious skepticism. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't have the right to ask for that. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing with those kids, it's important. And I'm sorry we couldn't see your worth." The words I had longed to hear for decades now hung between us, arriving too late to heal the original wounds, but still landing with surprising weight. "Thank you for saying that," I finally responded, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. "It means something to hear you acknowledge it. Could we maybe meet sometime?" she asked tentatively. "Just to talk. Your father isn't ready, and Victoria may never be ready. But I'd like to try if you're willing." I thought about Dr. Torres's advice about boundaries and expectations, about the strength I'd built and the life I'd created, about the difference between reconciliation and forgiveness. "I need time to think about it," I said honestly. "This isn't a simple yes or no for me." "I understand," she replied, and for once I believed she might actually be trying to. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my office for a long time, watching the streetlights create patterns on the wall as cars passed by below. The call had stirred up emotions I thought I'd processed, fully revealing new layers still needing attention. The next morning, I discussed it with Dr. Torres in an emergency session. "What do you want from this potential meeting?" she asked. "Not what you think you should want, but what you actually want." I considered the question seriously. I want her to truly understand the impact of what they did. Not just say the words, but really get it. And I want to look her in the eye as an equal, not as the lesser daughter. Beyond that, I'm not sure. "Those are valid wants," Dr. Torres affirmed. "And they're focused on your needs rather than falling back into caretaking for her feelings. That's progress." After careful consideration and setting clear boundaries, I agreed to meet my mother at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between Portland and Seattle. Morgan insisted on coming with me, waiting at a nearby table in case things became too difficult. The day of the meeting arrived with a rare October sunshine illuminating the fall colors. I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of the door, and the comforting knowledge that Morgan sat within eyesight, pretending to work on her laptop while actually keeping a protective watch. When my mother walked in, I was struck by how much she had aged in less than a year. Her hair, once meticulously colored and styled, now showed significant gray and was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore minimal makeup, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. The carefully maintained facade of the perfect Parker family matriarch had crumbled. Our conversation started awkwardly with surface-level updates and long pauses. But gradually, as the minutes passed, something shifted. For the first time in my memory, my mother spoke to me without the constant comparison to Victoria, without the subtle digs and dismissals I'd grown so accustomed to. She told me about her therapy journey, how she'd been forced to confront the way her own mother had pitted her against her sister, creating a template she unconsciously replicated in our family. "I'm not saying this excuses anything," she clarified, "but understanding where it came from has helped me see how deeply unfair it was to you." Then she said something that truly shocked me. "You were always the stronger one, you know, even as a little girl. You figured out how to make your own way while Victoria needed constant propping up. We mistook your resilience for not needing us, and we failed you completely." Tears filled her eyes, but unlike the performative crying I'd seen her use to manipulate situations in the past, these seemed genuine, accompanied by no demands for comfort or forgiveness. I felt a complex tangle of emotions, vindication that she finally saw the truth, grief for the relationship we might have had, and a strange new feeling that resembled compassion for this flawed woman, trying very late to face her failings. "I've built a good life," I told her, "one that I'm proud of." "I can see that," she said softly. "The article showed how many people you're helping. You've become someone remarkable, Olivia. Not because of us, but despite us." We talked for nearly 2 hours covering ground I never thought we'd be able to traverse. She told me that my father was still in denial, blaming me for the family's troubles. Victoria had filed for divorce and moved back to Seattle, her perfect image shattered by the public revelation of her behavior. "And Lucas?" I asked, wondering about my nephew. "He's struggling," she admitted. "The counseling program has been good for him, but he's angry at everyone right now. Mostly at his mother for the divorce, but also at himself, I think. He asks about you sometimes." That surprised me. "What does he ask?" "If you're really as bad as Victoria always said." She looked down at her coffee cup. "I've started telling him the truth, that you were never the problem." As our meeting drew to a close, I felt no dramatic reconciliation, no Hollywood moment of forgiveness and reunion. But I did feel something shifting, a door opening just slightly to the possibility of a different kind of relationship in the future. Not based on the old dynamic, but on something more honest with proper boundaries and realistic expectations. "I'd like to see you again," my mother said as we prepared to leave. "But only if and when you want to. I'm trying to learn to respect your choices." I nodded. "I'll think about it. No promises, but I'll think about it." As I watched her walk to her car, her shoulders slightly stooped with the weight of regret and lost years, I felt the last remnants of that desperate need for her approval finally dissolve. Whether we built some new form of relationship or not, I was complete on my own terms now. Morgan joined me as my mother's car pulled away. "How are you feeling?" "Surprisingly okay," I said, realizing it was true. "Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying for years." "Want to talk about it over dinner?" she asked. "The whole circle is getting together at Rachel's tonight. Jasmine's bringing that chocolate mousse you love." I smiled, thinking of the warm, loving community waiting for me, the chosen family that had helped me heal and grow. "Absolutely," I said. "Let's go home." Driving back to Portland with Morgan watching the golden afternoon light filtering through the trees along the highway, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The journey had been painful, the confrontations necessary but draining. Yet here I was whole and strong, moving forward into a life rich with genuine connection and purpose. I thought about the young people in the Your Worth project, especially Emma, whose eyes now held a spark of self-belief that hadn't been there when we first met. I thought about the women's circle, the thread of support and understanding that wove through all our lives now. I thought about Wheaton Wonder, the thriving community hub. It had become so different from the desperate dream I'd clung to in those dark days of family manipulation. Life would always have complications and challenges. My relationship with my mother might grow into something healing, or it might not progress beyond today's tentative beginning. My father and Victoria might never acknowledge the harm they'd caused. Lucas might or might not find his way to a healthier path than his parents had modeled. But none of these uncertainties defined me anymore. I had broken free of being the family scapegoat, the invisible daughter, the convenient solution to everyone else's problems. I had reclaimed my story and rewritten it on my own terms. That night, surrounded by friends who had become family, sharing food and laughter in Rachel's warm kitchen, I raised my glass in a quiet toast to myself, to the journey from shadow to light, to the courage to stand alone when necessary, and most of all, to the discovery that sometimes the family that truly sees and values you is the one you create for yourself along the way. To finding our worth, I said. To finding our worth. They echoed glasses clinking in the golden light, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. One quiet weekend afternoon, Portland was draped in light rain. The silver-gray sky reflected on the wet sidewalks. I was wiping down the counter, rearranging the trays of pastries nearly sold out for the day, when my eyes caught the large front window. Outside, standing silently beneath the awning, were my parents. They didn't knock, didn't wave, just stood there, their eyes searching inside as if looking for something. For a moment I felt surprised, but instead of the sharp ache that used to grip me, my heart only rippled softly and then stilled. I kept wiping the counter, adjusting the menu board as though I hadn't noticed them at all. A few minutes later, when the last faint light of the day shone through, I gently switched off the lights, locked the door, and drew the curtain. When I looked out one final time, they had already turned and walked away. No words, no tears, no staged reconciliation. Only two aging silhouettes lost in the city that once proudly called them the model family. In that moment, I realized what I had waited for all those years. A single apology, an embrace, a look of recognition was no longer necessary. I didn't feel pain anymore. I didn't feel empty. Instead, a strange peace settled over me. I was no longer binding my life to their eyes or their approval. I had rewritten the definition of myself, and it was a definition no one could ever take away. I often hear people say blood is blood. You must forgive. But my experience taught me that sometimes blood ties are the most toxic weight of all, suffocating you until you cannot breathe. Forgiveness does not mean returning to accept being hurt again. Forgiveness at times means having the courage to let go, to walk away, and to stop waiting for them to change. True healing is not when they collapse. It is when you stop letting them define your worth. Only then can you live fully. Looking back, I see my journey not as a series of acts of revenge or punishment, but as a process of liberation. I learned how to set boundaries, how to protect what is mine, and how to build a new family from those who truly value me. They are the young employees at my shop who wake with me at dawn to bake bread, the loyal customers who leave notes saying, "Thank you for being strong." The friends who share no blood with me yet reach out their hands whenever I need. They are the family I once thought I would never have. One evening, after the shop had closed following a busy day, I sat with a few of my staff. Emma, who had completed the Your Worth project and now worked part-time while attending community college, hesitated before asking, "Olivia, how are you able to be so strong when facing your own family?" I smiled, took a sip of warm tea, and replied, "No one is born strong." I cried, I trembled, I wanted to give up. But one day I realized that if I kept bowing down, I would lose myself. And when I chose to stand up, I discovered that strength had always been inside me, just waiting to be called by its name. I saw her eyes glisten, and I knew my story had become a living lesson for someone else. I want to share this message with everyone hearing my story today. You have the right to walk away from a toxic family. You have the right to choose peace over blood ties. You have the right to set boundaries even with the people who gave you life. Don't let anyone tell you that you are selfish for protecting yourself. The truth is that freedom and self-respect are never selfish. They are the foundation for building a healthy life, nurturing real love, and opening yourself to better relationships. In the end, I learned that in this journey, victory was not seeing them fall, but no longer falling because of them. Victory was not the settlement money or the court's ruling, but the mornings. I opened my shop, greeted customers with a smile, and carried no fear inside me. Victory was not when they lost everything, but when I found myself. Now every day I live within a family I chose for myself. A family built on respect, on unconditional love, and on people who don't need blood ties to see one another with fairness. I have built a new life with my own hands, a life where I am heard, where I am valued, and where I am free to be myself. And when night falls, I go to sleep in peace, knowing I am no longer the shadow in the Parker household. I am Olivia, and I have found my true home in my own heart. The Portland spring unfolded in delicate shades of pink and white as cherry blossoms lined the streets near my coffee shop. A year had passed since the courthouse steps in Seattle, where I had walked away from my family with my head held high. Weed and Wonder had flourished beyond my expectations, becoming more than just a bakery but a sanctuary where the scent of fresh bread and coffee created a sense of home I had never known growing up. On this particular morning, the sunlight streamed through the front windows, catching dust motes dancing in golden beams. I stood behind the counter arranging a display of lemon tarts when the bell above the door chimed. A young woman entered, perhaps 16 or 17, with hunched shoulders and downcast eyes that seemed familiar in their careful assessment of the world. "Welcome to Weed and Wonder," I greeted her with a smile. She twisted the strap of her backpack, eyes darting around the space before landing briefly on mine. "Are you Olivia Parker?" Something in her nervous demeanor struck a chord. "Yes, I am. Can I help you with something?" "My name is Emma," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I read about you in the newspaper. The article about standing up to your family and everything." I gestured to a quiet table in the corner away from other customers. "Would you like to sit down? Maybe have some hot chocolate while we talk?" Emma nodded gratefully, following me to the table. I signaled to Andrea, my assistant manager, to bring over 2 mugs of hot chocolate with whipped cream. We settled across from each other, and I waited patiently while she gathered her courage. "My parents always compare me to my older brother," she finally said. "He gets straight A's without trying, sports trophies, college scholarships, and I just, I can't keep up." Her fingers traced patterns on the wooden tabletop. "Last week, my dad said I was a disappointment, that I wasn't trying hard enough." The words hit me like a physical blow. How many times had I heard similar sentiments from my own parents? How many times had Victoria's accomplishments been held up as the gold standard, while my efforts remained invisible? "I stay up until 2 in the morning studying," Emma continued, "and I still barely get B's. They won't even consider that I might have a learning disability. They just say I'm not applying myself." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "I believe you." Those 3 simple words seemed to startle her. She looked up wide-eyed as if no one had ever said that to her before. "You're working twice as hard as your brother, aren't you?" I asked. She nodded, eyes filling with tears. "And no one sees it. They only see the results, not the effort." A tear spilled down her cheek. "Exactly." We talked for over an hour. I shared pieces of my own story carefully edited for her age, but honest about the pain of never measuring up in my family's eyes. I connected her with resources for learning disability assessments at her school, and gave her information about setting appropriate boundaries even as a minor. Before she left, I invited her to join our Saturday youth baking program, where she could develop skills and confidence away from her family's critical eyes. The grateful smile she gave me as she left was like looking at my younger self finally being seen. That evening, as I locked up the shop, I found myself reflecting on Emma's visit during my session with Dr. Elena Torres, my therapist of the past year. It felt like looking at a mirror to my past, I told her, settling into the comfortable chair in her warm office. All those years I spent believing something was fundamentally wrong with me when the problem was always the toxic dynamic. Dr. Torres nodded thoughtfully. You've moved into the next phase of recovery, Olivia. You're transforming your trauma into a way to help others. That's an incredibly powerful healing mechanism. I just wish someone had seen me when I was Emma's age, I admitted. Someone who could have said, "This isn't your fault." And now you can be that person for others, she said with a gentle smile. You're creating the support you needed but never received. Her words stayed with me long after our session ended. Over the following weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma and other young people facing similar struggles. With the help of Morgan, my attorney friend, and Rachel from the Women's Circle, I began to formalize plans for what would become the Your Worth Project, an 8-week summer program for teenagers experiencing family-based emotional abuse or neglect. We combined skill-building workshops in baking and business with supportive group therapy sessions led by volunteer counselors. Emma was among our first 12 participants, her shy smile gradually growing more confident with each meeting. The project caught the attention of local media, and soon a reporter from the Oregonian was sitting in my office, recorder in hand. What made you decide to create this program? She asked. I considered the question carefully. When you've been told your entire life that you don't matter, that you're less valuable than someone else, you start to believe it. It becomes the lens through which you see everything. This program exists to shatter that lens and help these young people see their true worth before they spend decades trying to prove themselves to people who will never truly see them. The article appeared the following Sunday, taking up most of the lifestyle section's front page. The headline read, "From Family Scapegoat to Community Beacon, How Olivia Parker Turned Personal Pain into Purpose." The response was overwhelming. Emails and calls flooded in from parents wanting to enroll their children, educators seeking resources, and potential donors asking how they could support the program. But most moving were the messages from people sharing their own stories of family dysfunction and expressing gratitude for the public conversation the article had started. It was after reading one such message late one evening, as I sat alone in my office above the bakery, that my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't seen in almost a year, Mom. My heart pounded against my ribs as I stared at those 3 letters. Part of me wanted to ignore it to maintain the peaceful life I'd built, without my family's toxicity. But another part, perhaps the therapist's voice in my head, was curious about what had prompted this reach out after so long. After 4 rings, I answered. Hello? Olivia. My mother's voice sounded older, more hesitant than I remembered. I saw the article about your program. I waited, not offering any response to make this easier for her. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she continued, the words coming slowly as if each one cost her. And I've been seeing someone. A therapist, I mean. Your father doesn't know. This surprised me. My mother had always dismissed therapy as for weak people who can't solve their own problems. She's helped me understand some things, my mother went on, about how we treated you, about the role we forced you into in our family. I remained silent, processing her words with cautious skepticism. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said, her voice cracking slightly. I don't have the right to ask for that. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing with those kids, it's important, and I'm sorry we couldn't see your worth. The words I had longed to hear for decades now hung between us, arriving too late to heal the original wounds, but still landing with surprising weight. Thank you for saying that, I finally responded, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. It means something to hear you acknowledge it. Could we maybe meet sometime? She asked tentatively. Just to talk. Your father isn't ready, and Victoria may never be ready. But I'd like to try if you're willing. I thought about Dr. Torres's advice about boundaries and expectations, about the strength I'd built and the life I'd created, about the difference between reconciliation and forgiveness. I need time to think about it, I said honestly. This isn't a simple yes or no for me. I understand, she replied, and for once I believe she might actually be trying to. After careful consideration and setting clear boundaries, I agreed to meet my mother at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between Portland and Seattle. Morgan insisted on coming with me, waiting at a nearby table in case things became too difficult. The day of the meeting arrived with a rare October sunshine illuminating the fall colors. I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of the door, and the comforting knowledge that Morgan sat within eyesight, pretending to work on her laptop while actually keeping a protective watch. When my mother walked in, I was struck by how much she had aged in just over a year. Her hair, once meticulously colored and styled, now showed significant gray and was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore minimal makeup, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. The carefully maintained facade of the perfect Parker family matriarch had crumbled. Our conversation started awkwardly with surface-level updates and long pauses. But gradually, as the minutes passed, something shifted. For the first time in my memory, my mother spoke to me without the constant comparison to Victoria, without the subtle digs and dismissals I'd grown so accustomed to. She told me about her therapy journey, how she'd been forced to confront the way her own mother had pitted her against her sister, creating a template she unconsciously replicated in our family. I'm not saying this excuses anything, she clarified, but understanding where it came from has helped me see how deeply unfair it was to you. Then she said something that truly shocked me. You were always the stronger one, even as a little girl. You figured out how to make your own way while Victoria needed constant propping up. We mistook your resilience for not needing us, and we failed you completely. Tears filled her eyes, but unlike the performative crying I'd seen her use to manipulate situations in the past, these seemed genuine, accompanied by no demands for comfort or forgiveness. I've built a good life, I told her, one that I'm proud of. I can see that, she said softly. The article showed how many people you're helping. You've become someone remarkable, Olivia. Not because of us, but despite us. We talked for nearly 2 hours covering ground I never thought we'd be able to traverse. She told me that my father was still in denial, blaming me for the family's troubles. Victoria had filed for divorce and moved back to Seattle, her perfect image shattered by the public revelation of her behavior. And Lucas? I asked, wondering about my nephew. He's struggling, she admitted. The counseling program has been good for him, but he's angry at everyone right now. Mostly at his mother for the divorce, but also at himself, I think. He asks about you sometimes. That surprised me. What does he ask? If you're really as bad as Victoria always said. She looked down at her coffee cup. I've started telling him the truth, that you were never the problem. As our meeting drew to a close, I felt no dramatic reconciliation, no Hollywood moment of forgiveness and reunion. But I did feel something shifting, a door opening just slightly to the possibility of a different kind of relationship in the future. Not based on the old dynamic, but on something more honest with proper boundaries and realistic expectations. I'd like to see you again, my mother said as we prepared to leave, but only if and when you want to. I'm trying to learn to respect your choices. I nodded. I'll think about it. No promises, but I'll think about it. As I watched her walk to her car, her shoulders slightly stooped with the weight of regret and lost years, I felt the last remnants of that desperate need for her approval finally dissolve. Whether we built some new form of relationship or not, I was complete on my own terms now. Morgan joined me as my mother's car pulled away. How are you feeling? Surprisingly okay, I said, realizing it was true. Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying for years. Want to talk about it over dinner? She asked. The whole circle is getting together at Rachel's tonight. Jasmine's bringing that chocolate mousse you love. I smiled, thinking of the warm, loving community waiting for me, the chosen family that had helped me heal and grow. Absolutely, I said. Let's go home. Winter settled over Portland with gentle rains rather than snow, the city lights reflecting in puddles that dotted the streets. The holiday season approached, bringing both excitement and melancholy. This would be my second Christmas completely separated from my biological family, but my first with a strong circle of friends who had become my chosen family. The bakery was transformed with subtle decorations, evergreen branches, copper string lights, and handmade ornaments created by the teens in our program. Business was brisk, with customers ordering special holiday treats and gift baskets. I had hired 2 new staff members to help manage the increased demand, including Emma, who now worked weekend shifts and was flourishing with the responsibility. One Saturday morning in mid-December, I was teaching a special holiday baking class for the Your Worth Project teens when the bell above the door chimed. Looking up from the gingerbread dough I was demonstrating, I froze. Lucas stood in the doorway, a gangly 13-year-old with his hands stuffed in the pockets of a jacket too light for the weather. Behind him, my mother waited nervously, staying outside the shop, clearly giving him space to enter alone. Emma noticed my expression and smoothly took over the demonstration, allowing me to step away from the group. I approached Lucas with careful steps, unsure of his purpose or emotional state. "Lucas," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "this is a surprise." His eyes darted around the shop, taking in the holiday decorations, the teens working at the counters, before finally meeting mine. "Hi, Aunt Olivia." The title caught me off guard. After everything, he still considered me his aunt. "Your grandmother is outside?" I asked, glancing toward the window where my mother waited. He nodded. "She said I could come in alone if I wanted to. I asked her to bring me." I gestured to a quiet table in the corner. "Would you like to sit down? Maybe have some hot chocolate?" Lucas nodded, a hint of the little boy he had been showing through his adolescent awkwardness. I prepared 2 mugs of hot chocolate with whipped cream and cinnamon, giving myself a moment to process this unexpected visit, then joined him at the table. "How are you doing, Lucas?" I asked, setting the mugs between us. He wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic but didn't drink. "Okay, I guess. School's fine." He paused. "Mom and Dad are getting divorced. Your grandmother mentioned that. I'm sorry you're going through that." He shrugged. "Dad moved to Chicago for work. Mom's still mad at you." I nodded, unsurprised. "And how do you feel about me?" The directness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked up from his mug, his eyes, so like Victoria's, meeting mine with unexpected frankness. "I was a real jerk to you," he said, "with the soda at the anniversary dinner, and the TikTok, and especially with your shop window." I maintained eye contact, but said nothing, allowing him the space to continue. "The counselor I've been seeing made me think about why I did those things." His fingers tightened around the mug. "Mom always said stuff about you, that you were jealous of her, that you didn't care about the family. I just believed her without thinking." "That happens sometimes," I said gently. "When we're young, we trust what our parents tell us. But I should have known better." His voice cracked slightly. "I was old enough to see how you were treated differently. I just went along with it because it was easier." The rawness of his self-awareness surprised me. The boy who had poured soda in my lap with gleeful malice was now facing his actions with a maturity I hadn't expected. "I can't fix what I did," he continued, "but I wanted to say I'm sorry. For real. Not just because the court made me." I felt a tightness in my chest begin to loosen. "Thank you, Lucas. That means a lot to me." He took a sip of his hot chocolate, leaving a whipped cream mustache that he quickly wiped away. "The shop is really cool. Grandma says you're helping kids who have family problems." "That's right," I said, glancing toward the group of teens still working on their gingerbread. "Everyone deserves to feel valued." Lucas nodded, his gaze following mine. "Could I maybe come to one of your classes sometime? Not to talk about my parents or anything, just to learn to bake." The request caught me completely off guard. This wasn't something I had ever imagined. Lucas willingly entering my world, asking to be part of something I had created. "I think we could arrange that," I said carefully. "Though you should know that we do talk about feelings sometimes, not just baking techniques." "That's okay," he said with another shrug. "My counselor says I need to get better at that anyway." I couldn't help but smile. "Then yes, you'd be welcome here, Lucas." After Lucas finished his hot chocolate and rejoined my mother outside, I watched them walk away, my emotions a complex tangle. The boy who had been one of the instruments of my family's cruelty was now seeking connection, perhaps even redemption. It was too soon to know if this represented real change or merely a momentary wish to ease his guilt, but the fact that he had come at all felt significant. That evening, I sat with the women's circle in Rachel's living room, sharing the story of Lucas's unexpected visit as we decorated a small Christmas tree with handmade ornaments. "Are you sure it's wise to let him into your program?" Jasmine asked, her protective instincts flaring. "After what he did to your shop, I'm not sure of anything," I admitted, hanging a paper star on a branch. "But he's just a kid who was taught some terrible patterns. If he's genuinely trying to break them, don't I have some responsibility to help?" "Your only responsibility is to yourself," Morgan reminded me. "Don't fall back into the family caretaker role." "This feels different," I said after a moment's reflection. "I'm not sacrificing myself to fix him. I'm offering the same support to him that I would to any teen who needed it with the same boundaries." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "Just be careful, Olivia. Set clear rules about his participation. And maybe have another adult present when he's there, at least at first." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Trust is earned, not given freely, especially after what happened." As the evening progressed, our conversation drifted to holiday plans. Rachel was hosting Christmas dinner for our circle, a potluck gathering that had everyone excited about their contributions. I had promised my special cranberry orange scones and cinnamon rolls for breakfast, along with a traditional Yule log cake. "What about your mother?" Rachel asked gently. "Will you see her over the holidays?" I added another ornament to the tree, taking time to arrange it just so. "She asked if we could have coffee again next week. I think she's hoping for some kind of Christmas connection, but I'm not ready for a full family gathering. Too many ghosts there." "One step at a time," Rachel said with an understanding smile. "The holidays have a way of making people rush emotional processes that need their own timeline." "Exactly," I nodded. "I'm open to building a new relationship with her, but I won't force it to match some Hallmark movie schedule of holiday reconciliation." Later that night, as I drove home through streets glittering with rain and colored lights, I reflected on how different this holiday season felt from the previous year. Then I had been still raw from the court case, still establishing my independence, still proving to myself that I could stand alone. Now, paradoxically, by accepting that I didn't need my biological family to be complete, I had created space where new connections with them might eventually grow. Not from obligation or manipulation, but from genuine choice and mutual respect. I parked outside my apartment building and paused before getting out of the car, watching raindrops make patterns on the windshield. The memories of past Christmases with the Parkers flashed through my mind. Victoria always at the center of attention, my parents beaming at her, me on the periphery with a carefully wrapped gift that would never quite measure up. But those memories no longer had the power to wound. They were simply scenes from a story I had survived and transcended. Now I was writing a new story, one in which I defined my own worth rather than accepting the narrow role others had assigned me. The following week brought my coffee meeting with my mother. We met at a small cafe near the Portland Art Museum, planning to visit the winter exhibit afterward if our conversation went well. "I spoke with Lucas about his visit to your bakery," she said after we'd settled with our drinks. "He hasn't stopped talking about it. The kids there, the baking, how different it felt from home." I warmed my hands on my mug, sensing there was more she wanted to say. "He asked if you would let him attend your program regularly," she continued. "I told him that would be entirely up to you, and that you'd have every right to say no." "I've been thinking about it," I admitted. "If he's serious about wanting to change, about learning different patterns of behavior, I don't want to stand in his way." My mother's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "That's very generous of you, Olivia. More than any of us deserve." "It's not about what anyone deserves," I said. "It's about breaking cycles. Lucas is young enough that he hasn't fully hardened into the family patterns yet. There's hope for him." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Victoria refuses to see her part in any of this. She's convinced herself that you manipulated everyone, that you're the villain in her story." "And Dad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She hesitated. He's not well, Olivia. His health has declined significantly this past year. Heart problems mainly. The doctor says stress is a major factor. I absorbed this information with a complex mixture of concern and detachment. I'm sorry to hear that. He's too proud to admit it, but losing his standing in the community after the court case hit him hard, she said. The church's business associates, even old friends, many of them distanced themselves once the truth came out. I sipped my coffee considering her words. Are you telling me this to make me feel guilty? No, she said quickly. No, that's not my intention at all. I thought you should know. You have a right to the truth even when it's difficult. We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the cafe filling the space between us. Would you consider visiting him? She finally asked. Not for his sake or even mine, but for your own closure, perhaps. I studied her face, searching for signs of the manipulation that had been so common in our family dynamics. But I saw only tired honesty in her eyes. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I can promise right now. She nodded, accepting my answer without pushing. That's fair. More than fair. We finished our coffee and decided to visit the museum after all. Walking through the quiet galleries, admiring winter landscapes and holiday-themed exhibits, we maintained a fragile peace. Not the forced harmony of the past, but something tentative and real, built on truth rather than appearances. As we parted at the museum entrance, my mother hesitated before saying, "Merry Christmas, Olivia. Whatever you decide about visiting your father, please know that I'm proud of the woman you've become. I should have seen your strength all along." The words settled around me like gentle snowfall, unexpected and transformative. Thank you, I said simply. Merry Christmas. When driving home, I realized that the visit had left me feeling not drained, as family interactions once had, but strangely energized. There was something powerful in standing before someone who had once dismissed me and feeling completely secure in my own value regardless of their assessment. Christmas week arrived with a flurry of activity at the bakery. Special orders poured in, and the Your Worth Project held a holiday celebration for current and former participants. Emma had taken on leadership responsibilities, helping younger teens with their baking projects, and sharing her own story of finding strength. On Christmas Eve, I closed the shop early and headed to Rachel's house for our chosen family gathering. The warmth that greeted me as I entered her home, the scent of pine and cinnamon, the sound of laughter, the genuine joy at my arrival, washed over me like a healing balm. We cooked together, sharing stories and jokes as we prepared a feast that combined each person's holiday traditions. Jasmine contributed her grandmother's Lebanese dishes, Morgan brought her famous Southern macaroni and cheese, and Rachel had prepared her family's traditional ham with all the trimmings. As we settled around the table, Rachel raised her glass. "To finding our worth," she said, echoing the toast I had offered months ago. "To finding our worth," we replied in unison, glasses clinking in the candlelight. Later, as we sat by the fire exchanging small gifts, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Lucas. "Merry Christmas, Aunt Olivia. Looking forward to baking class next month." I showed the message to Morgan, who squeezed my hand in understanding. "Life has a funny way of circling back, doesn't it?" she said. "It does," I agreed. "But this time I'm meeting it on my own terms." And as midnight approached, we stepped out onto Rachel's back porch to admire the clear winter sky, stars brilliant in the darkness. Standing there surrounded by my chosen family, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The journey from shadow to light had been painful, filled with necessary confrontations and difficult choices. But here in this moment, I could finally see the full scope of what I had gained. By standing up for myself, by refusing to remain the family scapegoat, by believing in my own worth when no one else would. I had not just survived. I had created a life rich with genuine connection, purpose, and joy. And perhaps most importantly, I had become someone who could help others find their way out of similar darkness. As we counted down to Christmas Day, arms linked in friendship, and chosen family love, I gazed up at the star-filled sky and whispered a quiet thank you. Not to the family that had failed to see me, but to the strength within myself that had always known my true worth, even when I could not yet recognize it. That strength had carried me through the darkest nights and brought me here to this circle of light and love, to this new horizon where I could finally see myself clearly, not as the lesser daughter, not as the family shadow, but as Olivia Parker, valued whole and shining with a light entirely her own.